Hi everybody, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're having a great week. We're back from our hiking trip, so I wanted to work in some March mystery madness and talk about Devil in a Blue Dress by Walter Mosley, which is a really good book. It's a really enjoyable book. If you've never read any Mosley before, this would be a great place to start because this is the first book in his Easy Rawlins detective series, which spans roughly late 1940s Los Angeles, California, all the way up to the 1960s. And we get to sort of see how LA, California, the neighborhood Watts, how those change across this span of 20 years, all with interesting crime novels. But this is a great book to start it off. It kind of functions as an origin story for how does Rawlins become a detective. And it was published in 1990, and it is so evident that Walter Mosley had read and paid attention to writers like Raymond, Chandler, Dashiell, Hammett, Ross MacDonald, and how they not only crafted crime novels with a private detective as the central character, but also how they looked at that perception that existed around sort of the California dream and sunshine and opportunity and all these people moving out there, and realized, okay, yes, these opportunities exist, but human choices and human foibles can turn that dream into a nightmare. And what then happens when you have characters who are trying to maintain some of their integrity, trying to maintain some of their dignity, trying to recapture a vestige of that dream as these things, collapse around them. And Mosley very much, gives us that with Easy Rawlins. One of the things that makes the series very strong is not just that we get to see California and, and LA and Watts shifting across 20 years, but in each of the books it feels like there's some aspect of what Rawlins was searching for when he came to California, when he basically fled Houston, Texas, after World War II. When he came to California, he had this whole dream, and so what are the pieces of that dream that he's going to be able to recapture and pull back to himself across his adult life within this sequence of books? And so it's very good. I do recommend it. I don't want to talk too much about the plot, because I don't want to give things away, but I would like to read a couple passages that just give a sense of what the book reads like. What does it sound like? In case you're interested. When I opened the door, I was slapped in the face by the force of Lip's alto horn. I had been hearing Lips and Willie and Flat Top since I was a boy in Houston. All of them and John and half the people in that crowded room had migrated from Houston after the war, and some before that. California was like heaven for the Southern Negro. People told stories of how you could eat fruit right off the trees and get enough work to retire one day. The stories were true for the most part, but the truth wasn't like the dream. Life was still hard in LA, and if you worked every day, you still found yourself on the bottom. But being on the bottom didn't feel so bad if you could come to John's now and then and remember how it felt back home in Texas, dreaming about California. Sitting there and drinking John's scotch, you could remember the dreams you once had, and for a while, it felt like you had them for real. And then on the next page, I noticed Frank Green at the bar. We called him Knife Hand because he was so fast to pull a knife that it seemed he always had one in his hand. I stayed away from Frank because he was a gangster. He hijacked liquor trucks and cigarette shipments all over California, and Nevada too. He was serious about everything and just about ready to cut any man he met. I noted that Frank was wearing all dark clothes. In Frank's line of business, that meant he was about to go out to work, hijacking, or worse. The room was so crowded that there was barely any space to dance, but there were a dozen or so couples wrestling out there between the tables. And so, we're dropped into these scenes that are just filled with characters, filled with little details that this character Rawlins notices. And he's not a private detective by training. He's not an ex-cop. He did serve as a veteran in World War II, and he, has seen combat from World War II. And so we get memories of his, but it's a different way of looking at private detective crime fiction, and I think it works really well. It feels more like any one of us could be in that room noticing some of the same things Easy Rawlins notices, and he's not necessarily solving crimes, outsmarting everybody. It's very much more in that Philip Marlowe tradition of outlasting everybody, being able to survive long enough for the truth to sort of reveal itself, as often kind of feels, happens in life. And so it works really well. Briefly, in terms of the plot, Rawlins has lost his job. He has a mortgage coming due. So a friendly bartender says, hey, I know somebody who's looking for a young woman who's run off. why don't I, put you in touch with that person? You can just collect some quick money. Even if you don't find her, no big deal. You'll have some quick money to pay your mortgage. And from there, things start to spiral. People start to die, and so we get a crime novel, but it feels very much as if we're along for the ride with the main character Rawlins, and it feels very, very natural to be with him. He's a very easy companion to ride along with. The other thing that I think Mosley introduces that is different from Philip Marlowe, Sam Spade, Lou Archer, those types of characters, is that Easy Rawlins is black. And so when those characters go and are like accused of a crime and thrown in a jail cell to, cool their heels for a few hours, and sweat it out, and then the cops are going to question them, we kind of have this sense of like, oh, like we know they didn't do it, but, what's going to happen? Well, there's a very different fear that exists when Easy Rawlins is thrown in a jail cell and is just, beaten up. And he knows that if, he says at one point, like, some of the people who have died are black, and there's not a huge amount of concern around solving that crime. But if someone who's white has been killed, they're definitely going to solve that crime. And he knows he didn't do it, but he doesn't want to be accused of it, and he doesn't want to be, sort of like put up and framed for it. And so there's a very different sense of fear that exists, even though the way it's narrated, we can tell that Easy Rawlins is talking from the future about this being some past experience, and it's first person. So we know like he's going to make it through the book. It's obvious from like the third page. But there is this undercurrent of fear of what's going to happen, of this could be a very bad situation for him or for one of his other friends who might, be questioned as well. And so it works really well, and it's a great book. There are, of course, some secrets and twists that occur, and maybe people see them coming, maybe they don't. But again, I don't know that that's why the book works so well, is it's not just a crime novel. It's very much illuminating this world of late 1940s Los Angeles and sort of a transplanted population who have realized things aren't maybe what I thought they would be, but I sure would like them to, at least get a little bit better. So let me know if you've read any of the Easy Rawlins books. I think my favorite is White Butterfly, although A Red Death, which is set like in the 1950s with sort of the Red Scare going on, is really quite strong. Or if you've read any of Mosley's other books, he doesn't just have the Easy Rawlins series. I had mentioned, of course, writers like Raymond Chandler's Big Sleep, Dashiell Hammett. Probably the Maltese Falcon is the one that feels closest to Devil in a Blue Dress. Ross MacDonald, really any of his books would fit in as well. There is a sense of Mickey Spillane's Mike Hammer series, more like I, the Jury, My Gun is Quick type books. But these are set on the West Coast, so there's a difference. The one I would say that I noticed a little bit more would maybe be a closer comparison to Mosley, would maybe be some of the early Detroit novels of Elmore and Leonard, works like 52 Pickup, or especially Unknown Man Number 89, set in sort of 1970s Detroit. And Arthur Lyons is another LA sort of based crime novelist who I really enjoyed. The Dead Are Discreet, which was his first book. And he has, a private detective who is like a former reporter. And so, like Rawlins, there's a twist on the private detective and like what you expect and what that character's sort of life experiences have been that make it read a little bit differently. And then in terms of some of the ways in which just you have sort of some of the neighborhoods that Rawlins is Mosley creates, there is this sense of Richard Wright's Native Son. It feels like that's another book he's read. So again, this was my first March Mystery Madness video for this year, and I'll hope to have another one maybe this weekend. Have a great one. Thanks.